Today's video is going to be about congressional elections and districting. This is for the legislative branch homework video number 2. Now, the first lesson talked about congressional job approval, and what you need to remember is that it's low, and it's almost always low. As we can see here, it almost never cracks 40%, and the time that it did, that spike here, you can see it's right before 2002, which is 9/11. Since then, Congress has gotten worse and worse and worse than it's ever been. And what we talked about the other day was that it's currently at 9%. It's not even in double digits anymore, which means only 1 out of every 10 people actually like the job Congress is doing. Everyone else says they don't. If we think about elections, this would suggest that people who are in Congress are not getting reelected for their jobs, because if 9 out of 10 people don't like the job you're doing, there's no way you can win an election. But if we look at the House of Representatives, their reelection rates are staggering. Almost all of them get reelected over and over and over again. So even though people say they hate Congress, 9 out of 10 people say they disapprove of what Congress is doing, the people in Congress keep winning re-election at rates over 80%. Very little change is happening in there. So even though we don't like the job they're doing, all the people keep remaining the same. What's even crazier is that people in the House of Representatives have to run for re-election every 2 years. So they are constantly running for re-election. The Senate, who runs for re-election every 6 years, we don't see much difference. Still, in the past 10 years, 20 years, almost all the elections still had over 80% of them winning. If we look at seniority, which is how long a congressman has been in office in the House, we have people who've been there for over 40 years, and 73 of them out of the 435 have over 20 years of experience, which means they've won more than 10 elections. In the Senate, it's not very different. While they don't have quite the same number of years, there's still 17 out of 100 who have over 20 years of experience. So our big question here is, if everybody hates Congress like they're saying, then why do they keep getting reelected? We would think that popularity would tie to elections, because that's the big popularity contest. So we're going to start looking at that question today, and we're going to focus on the House of Representatives. Now, some key terms you want to keep in mind. A candidate is a person running for office. An incumbent is the person running for re-election. This means they have to currently have the job. So the House incumbent, or the representative, is the person who's currently the representative for that district, who's trying to fight to keep their seat in the election. And as we know, now they win a lot. And last but not least, we have the constituency. That's us, we the people. These are the people voting for that particular candidate. If you are the representative from the 3rd District in California, your constituents are the people in the 3rd District of California, not the people in D.C. You don't represent me. I didn't vote for you. It's your people back home. All right, so let's just look at constituents for a little bit. We have the presidential constituency, which is the whole great United States of America. We have senators, whose constituents are the entire state. Remember in the Great Compromise that each state gets 2 senators, no matter how big or how small. So even little Delaware gets 2, Maryland gets 2, Pennsylvania gets 2, New Jersey gets 2, Virginia gets 2, West Virginia gets 2. Sorry, D.C., we get none. Now, the House of Representatives is based on population, and that changes every 10 years, as we'll talk about. So Maryland currently has 8 representatives. Delaware only has 1, and Virginia has, I believe, 11. Now, an observation. The House of Representatives gets reelected at a higher rate than the Senate. It was close to 100% in all years but 2010, which was considered historic, and that didn't even dip below 80%. So why is that? Everyone hates them. What's going on? One of the big answers here is what we call congressional districting. And this is the process of creating congressional districts, which we're going to look at today. Now, the first step here is that we divide up the states based on population. This is determined by the U.S. government using the U.S. Census data every 10 years under the Department of Commerce. If a state grows faster than another state, it becomes eligible to gain a district while another state might lose one. Let's see this here in action. So what we can see here is just based on the population. This is the current number of representatives per state. Now you do need to subtract 2 from each number because 2 of these people are the senators. We can see here California has the most at 53 representatives. Montana would only have 1 because again 2 of these are senators. Even though it's a big state, there's not very many people. And I was correct, Virginia has 11. DC, we do have 1, though she can't vote. So on and so forth. Step 2, we then have to divide up those people amongst the state. This job belongs to the state legislature, the state government. The number 1 rule is they have to put or allocate the same approximate number of people to each district. This is usually around 550,000, depending on the size of the state. Rule number 2, it must be contiguous. This means they share a common border or are connected. We'll look at that shortly. If we look here, this is a contiguous district. District number 1. This one, if these were both district number 2 and you were representing these are not contiguous, which means this district here is a no-go. All right. So he said, rules, you have to have equal number of people in each district. If you don't, we call that malapportionment. That's when you get unequal population in a district. And the Supreme Court found this unconstitutional because it does not grant equal access. And that was in Westbury v. Sanders. Now, the process of drawing district boundaries to give one political party advantage over the other is called gerrymandering. Think about it. We are giving a state government the ability to draw the map. Governments are made up of Democrats and Republicans here in the United States. And that means that they are going to try to draw the map to benefit their political party. Why wouldn't they? If a Democrat controls the state legislature, they're going to draw a map to favor Democrats so that more Democrats can win in the House of Representatives. Here's what they do. So it's Republicans versus Democrats to make these maps and majority rules, which is why state governments are very important. The governor does have to sign off. So if it's a divided government, then maybe you'll get a pretty good map. But if it's all Democrats or all Republicans, like in a state like Texas or California, then you're going to get some pretty crazy districts. What they do is they gather data, information. They want to know who lives where. They want to know who's registered for what party, and when you do register to vote, if you check Democrat or Republican in the boxes, then they have that information. And they want to know your demographic information. They want to know your age, your sex, your race, your gender, and your religion. And they usually use the census to figure this out. And also your license, the registrations, and any formal documents you have to submit to the government they could use to figure out who you are and where you live. They then determine the likelihood of what political party you'll support. If you are a young African-American woman, they're going to guess that you're going to vote Democrat. But if you're a very wealthy white male, they might say, okay, you're probably going to vote Republican. So they make a guess, and they're usually good at guessing. And this is where political scientists could potentially get a job. They then draw congressional districts to get the most of their party in Congress as possible. Again, this is Operation Win Elections. We don't play to lose. Now, in 2001 Supreme Court case, The Supreme Court found that you could use race to draw your districts if it leads to an increase in minority reps. What this means is you could draw a district that has a majority African Americans. We call it a majority minority district. And that district might be more likely to vote for an African American, which the Supreme Court's decided is okay. What you can't do is draw up a district that would limit African American power. So if you saw that African Americans were all in a neighborhood together and you tried to draw 3 districts inside their neighborhood so that no African Americans could win, that's illegal. So you can increase minority reps, but you can't decrease. Now, a couple strategies here. One we call packing. This is drawing districts to include as many of the opposing party's voters as possible. This gives them a very safe district in one, so they're guaranteed 1 seat, but then they become weak minorities in many districts so that your party wins all the other seats. So if you've got 5 representatives there, sure, you give the Republicans 1, they're going to have to get 1, but then you get 4 of them to the Democrats if you can. Cracking is if you divide an opponent's voters into other districts to weaken their voter base. Now, gerrymandering strategies continued. The idea is to create safe districts for parties or people you like, and to create marginal districts for parties or people you don't like. Safe districts are ones you can win easily, marginal districts are ones you can't. Most states have laws saying that you have to live inside the district you run in. So if you don't like a current representative of your opposing party, draw them into another district so they'll have trouble winning. Unless they can afford to move their house, they might be out of luck. So you just destroy the district that they're in. And that's a common strategy for powerful representatives if you want to get them out. Now here we can see this actually at work. Now here, what we have is Republicans trying to cram all the Democrats into one spot. Now here, this is legal because this district is still connected, even though it kind of looks like it's 2 separate districts. It is still one district. And so what they did, they figured out who the Democrats were and they kind of draw the line to cram them all into one spot. We can see this in Texas. Now, the big thing here in Texas is that more and more Latinos are moving into the area. And Austin, Texas is very liberal. And here we can see Austin was electing a bunch of Democrats, or 1 Democrat, excuse me. In an attempt to destroy their power, they took some of the city of Austin and then they combined it with rural areas. And we know rural areas tend to vote Republican. So they made it so that Republican would still win even in the city of Austin. And then they did it again here. They broke apart the Democrats here and combined them with Republicans out here, making it so Republicans had more of a shot at winning. And then they did it over here in these Austin suburbs and broke it up here. So what was happening was Democrats were winning in 2 districts, and they decided to Democrats were winning here, but not here. And they decided to destroy that by making it so that no Democrats could win at all. Very clever. And legal. The impact of this is that House elections are fairly static, which means they don't change. They create districts that are easy to win. And it makes it very hard for freshmen to get elected, for new people to get in there. And it biases elections towards one political party over another. The Federal Election Commission is in charge of making sure that these laws are being followed. That includes redistricting. And sometimes they can get electoral maps thrown out by the courts if they violate any of the cases shown here, especially if they're used to break up the power of minorities.